Hello, everybody. Welcome to History Valley Podcast with your host, Jacob Berman. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Rodney Blackhirst. Dr. Blackhirst lectured in philosophy and religious studies at Trobe University for the past decade. He has diverse interests in philosophy, cosmology, and religion. He specializes in the Greek traditions and the monotheistic faiths. His doctorate re-examined the mystical foundations of Plato's dialogue, Timaeus. Dr. Blackhirst is a regular contributor to journals such as Sacred Web. And today we're going to be talking about this book, Primordial Alchemy and Modern Religion. I'll leave the links in the description to his Amazon, to his Amazon page, so you can go buy this book. I recommend it. Okay. You stated in your book that Plato recasts the Greek god of fire, Hephaestus, as the Demiurge. Do you think there's a connection to Plato's Demiurge to the Gnostic Demiurge? And if so, does this suggest Hephaestus as the Demiurge was recast as the Gnostic version of the Jewish god as Yaldabaoth?
Yeah, interesting question. Certainly the Gnosticism that you're talking about is Platonic in the sense that it's dualistic and that it develops particular themes from Plato and takes them into a monotheist environment. And Hephaestus, or Vulcan, I think is the prototype, is the mythological prototype of the demiurge in all of those contexts, and that he has both positive and negative aspects. There's a higher Vulcan and a lower Vulcan. He's the god who builds things and puts things together, but he's also the god of volcanoes and destruction and things like that. So it's a very mixed and extensive mythology. And so what we're talking about here is different aspects of it going into different spiritual environments, I think. Taking it into the Jewish environment is a whole other matter. But I think that's certainly what is happening in Gnosticism. Yes.
You also bring up Ptah as being the earlier Egyptian version of the Greek god Hephaestus.
Yeah.
Who the latter was adopted into the Greek pantheon from the former. Do you think that Hephaestus is a more advanced version of Ptah, or do you think in the long run Ptah and Hephaestus, even though being the same god, aren't very much different from one another?
Yeah, I think, well, once again, they're in two different environments, two different spiritual environments, two different vocabularies of symbolism and so forth. But the Egyptian culture is much older than Greek, and the Greeks are very aware of that. And in fact, in these dialogues of Plato, that's exactly where he says that, and where he very famously makes that point where the Egyptian priests say to Solon, you Greeks are just children compared to the Egyptians. And the Greeks are very aware of that. And so I think Ptah is the much older god. And in fact, the important thing here is that he's a god from prior to metalworking. But what happens is he's essentially a binding god. He binds things together. And by extension, this is carried over into metallurgical symbolism, and that's where we find Hephaestus. He's essentially a metal worker. He's the blacksmith. So we're talking about a later stage of symbolism where it has been extended to metals and metalworking. The idea here is that the blacksmith god knows the secrets of the universe. He knows the secrets of fire. He knows the secret powers which are hidden inside the metals, inside the most basic things of reality. I think that's what is happening here. But Hephaestus has been developed as in a metalworking environment and in the Greek context. Yeah.
How does actually I skipped a question there. What do you think caused the first Gnostics to confuse Plato's Demiurge with the Jewish God?
Again, they're moving into what you have in that whole historical period. In any case, is the meeting together of the Hellenic world with the Semitic world, or the Near Eastern world, and that's a very, very complex and also a very violent confrontation over a long period of time. We have the Jewish wars, and you have Ptolemaic Egypt, and you have Greek empires established throughout the Middle East and so forth. And so over a long period of time, those two cultures are blended together in often violent confrontations. And I think that Gnosticism and other things in that environment are a result of that clash. And in Gnosticism, it just takes that particular form. It takes the form of, once you move it into a monotheist language and a monotheist environment, what you're really trying to do there is move the Hellenic polytheist whole system and move it into a monotheist environment. How do you do that? There are many different solutions to that problem. You have people like Philo-Judaeus. He tries to marry together the Torah and Plato. There are all sorts of people trying to blend those two things together, and Gnosticism is a result of that blending. I think it's a way of taking Greek ideas, Platonic ideas specifically, and trying to understand the Jewish revelations and then later the Christian revelations in that context. I think that's what's going on there. Yeah. So it's essentially a syncretism. It's essentially a syncretic sort of thing. You're syncretizing two different things per force, because the Hellenic world literally moved into that neighborhood. And so they had to sort something out. Gnosticism is one of the products of that, I'm sure.
Another reason I asked that question is because Hephaestus is not viewed as an evil god by the Greeks, nor by the Romans. But the Gnostics or Marcionites, they viewed the Jewish God in a negative fashion. They viewed Yahweh as evil. They thought Jesus as the son of a higher being, higher than Yahweh. And,
but I'm not sure that Hephaestus is not an evil god, or doesn't have evil aspects in Greek mythology.
I know he tried to rape Athena.
Yeah, that's right. For instance, so he's brutish, but also even in, say, I think it's in the end of the first book of the Iliad, the book closes with Hephaestus blending together wines for the gods, and he's got a limp. He's defective in that sense and the other gods all laugh at him. He's an object of derision. He's laughable from the Olympians' point of view, that is to say. And also remember too that he's called upon to bind Prometheus to the rock, and that's a particularly Gnostic mythology where Prometheus, who steals the fire, is bound to the rock by the fire god. And with a terrible fate. He has his liver pecked out every day, and all of that. It's a terrible thing. And Hephaestus is the god who is responsible for that binding. He's the god in the Gnostic sense. Then this is an extension of Ptah, as a binding god. Hephaestus too is a binding god, and he binds together Aphrodite and Ares in the Odyssey. He binds their adultery together, for instance. And once again, there he's presented as a god of derision. He's presented there as a cuckold, and in the Prometheus myth, the idea there is that we are bound into this mortal existence and into a life of suffering, and he's the god that does that. So that's an aspect of him as the demiurge. He binds us into a world of suffering. I think that's the particular mythology that's carried over into the Gnostic Judaic environment.
That actually makes me think about something there. Hephaestus binding Prometheus. Prometheus tried to give man knowledge, tried to teach man fire. And in the book of Genesis, Yahweh curses the serpent.
Yes.
For what he had done by teaching Adam and Eve knowledge they should not have known. And I think that the early Gnostics might have equated that with Yahweh and the serpent in Genesis from the Hephaestus and Prometheus conflict. I didn't really think about that before this conversation. The other thing is,
the issue.
Go ahead.
The issue is knowledge, isn't it? In the Garden of Eden story, in the Prometheus story, and it's implied in the very word Gnostic. It's about knowledge here. Yeah, forbidden knowledge and things like that. Yeah.
And there was early Greek literature that, well, it's not really early, more like a little bit later actually, that identifies Hephaestus as being clearly identified with Ptah. Like in the, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, the Interpretatio Graeca identifies Hephaestus clearly with Ptah, and Ptah is portrayed as the creator of the world in the Egyptian creation myths.
Yes.
And it could be that the early Gnostics saw this, like, okay, so they thought Ptah and Hephaestus are the same god. And therefore, Hephaestus turns into a creator god as well, just as his former self was. And it makes him even a better fit to be the equivalent of the Gnostic Demiurge.
Yeah. That's muted in the Greek tradition, isn't it? That Hephaestus as a creator god. But the idea there is simply he's the divine craftsman. He makes things. He's the only one of the gods that makes things, and so by extension he becomes the divine craftsman in Plato's Cosmology, where the world itself is the cosmos itself is regarded as an artifact. The idea of a crafted cosmos. Well, they develop Hephaestus in that capacity. Although I think it's implicit there already. For instance, in the Iliad, he creates the shield of Achilles. Get a very long description of that, a beautiful description of that. He creates the metal shield for Achilles, but it's a world shield. It's a microcosmic shield. We see him like in the act of cosmogony there. He creates a world on the shield. And there's other ways in which he's presented as a creator god. And you're right, though, that in the Egyptian system, Ptah is much more obviously that than in the Greek system, yes.
So the point that I was trying to make earlier when I was asking about Hephaestus not being an evil god is that, yeah, he has done some evil things, but it's not like he's not typically depicted as being like massively evil, like say Kronos, who tried to eat his own children to prevent them from overthrowing him, that kind of level of evil. So I think, so the point I was trying to make is like, I feel like the Gnostics kind of upgraded just how evil Hephaestus was supposed to have been and took it to a whole nother mile.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Super evil cosmic god. And that's the part that I'm like, okay, where did they get that idea from to make him into a super evil god? Did they take an extreme interpretation of Hephaestus chaining Prometheus? What else could have happened?
I think that what happens here to some extent is that when you move things into a monotheist environment, things become much more black and white. There's many more shades of grey in a polytheist sort of system.
Yeah.
And so you get this spiritual environment that's already presenting itself as a contest between good and evil, whereas that's not really what's typical of the Greek tradition. But here what happens is a particular theme in Platonism, which is dualism, is sort of taken into that environment, and so what you get is that monotheist, good versus evil sort of environment, and now supercharged with Platonic philosophy and a very dualist reading of Plato, and Hephaestus, probably as the demiurge from the Timaeus, moves into that environment and becomes the Gnostic Demiurge, becomes the lower Demiurge. But really that's just thinking of the creation from a particular point of view, from the point of view of seeing it as a world of suffering, and so on. Yeah. And the world can be seen like that, particularly in, let's say, the Phaedo by Plato, which is a very dualistic worldview. Socrates is about to die, and essentially he says, well, good, because life is suffering, and let's all have a drink to the god of medicine and healing, because death is healing from this. You know, that's a very Gnostic sort of point of view, a very Gnostic reading of Plato, and you can get that from Plato. It's not the only reading of Plato, but that's a very dualistic reading of Plato, and that's what you get in that Hebraic, Jewish environment, I think. Yeah.
How does the story of Adam and Eve fit in the idea of the restoration of the inner cosmos?
Yeah. Well, you get in particular readings of this particular mythology, you get this idea that Eden is your starting point and your finishing point, and that in between you're exiled. So life is an exile from the garden. This idea is particularly stark, I guess, in Islamic mythology, where they have detailed descriptions of paradise and, you know, as a garden. But in Jewish symbolism as well, and Christian as well, you know, Christ is to redeem the sin of Adam and Eve. So it's about returning to that primal state, and the idea is that we're in some way lost or exiled, and that we have to find our way back to the garden, and that this is an inner journey. It's just our condition, and so it becomes an existential condition rather than a historical condition. It's an existential condition for everybody, that you have to recover that inner state. And so you get developments of it, like for instance, I think that's underpins Jungian psychology, for instance, where you have this idea of a male and a female, and then you have to marry the two together and reconcile the two inside yourself, and that sort of psychology that Jung was very interested in. Gnosticism, it's a theme of Gnosticism as well, the healing the primal schism, healing that primal bifurcation, and returning to the garden. That's the ending the exile, seems to be the idea. Yeah, it's a very extensive idea.
You also bring up cooking and cosmology and its role in the story of Adam and Eve. In the Mesopotamian myth of the tale of Adapa and the south wind, Adapa is told by Ea not to accept the food and water offerings from Dumazi and Ishida. Adapa listens and rejects their offerings, and then appears before Anu, who gets upset and sends Adapa back to Earth, and he told him he had made a terrible mistake, for he had lost the chance to become immortal because he had rejected the offerings of Anu's servants. Do you think this myth had an influence on the book of Genesis, especially on the Adam and Eve narrative?
Yeah. I think that that's sort of those sort of connections are very well established, both textually and in terms of mythography and things like that. That's right. This mythology and variations of this mythology go way back in the ancient Near East and in Mesopotamia. And uh, one particular version of it has survived in the book of Genesis. And although, in fact, in Genesis, of course, you get two accounts of creation, chapter 1 and chapter 2. There are two different accounts. So in Genesis, you've got a collection of material. And yeah, I'm sure that that particular mythology has influenced the book of Genesis. But because the issue in that mythology is eating, and the ambivalent status of eating, because, you know, 3 times a day we're reminded that that we're woven into and locked into and have no way out of a condition where we have to kill in order to survive. We have to destroy the life of other things in order to perpetuate ourselves. And where, moreover, we have, in the Adam and Eve story anyway, you know, we have to labor for that food. Eating reminds us of our mortal condition. I think that's a very Gnostic preoccupation. And so you get this interest in eating and cooking, and you know, by extension, it goes into religious traditions as food prohibitions and all sorts of regulations of food. Food becomes an area of moral danger. It becomes, you know, it becomes a difficult thing, and different traditions have different approaches to that.
What is interesting is in the Tale of Adapa and the South Wind, there is no equivalent to Eve in the story. Adapa doesn't have a wife called Eve, so where is Eve? But in the Greek myths, you have Pandora, who is blamed for opening the box called Pandora's box, and that's what causes the knowledge of good and evil to get out, and pretty much screws everything up. The story of Eve has also been compared by other scholars to Nenti, the Mesopotamian goddess, lady of the rib, because she's pulled out of Enki's rib. Enki, who supposedly is an earlier version of Ea. Enki, when he violated his, I think was his granddaughter or great-granddaughter, Utu, not to be confused with Utu, the sun god, and Nenhursag, or Nenma, comes in there, and she heals Enki by pulling out his organs and turns them into deities, goddesses. And one of them was his rib, and she turned it into Nenti. Do you think that part of the story could fill in the gap to explain how Eve got woven into the book of Genesis, but Adapa recast that as Adam?
Yeah, certainly. I think so, because that's right. Stories just turn up in the Hebrew scriptures. They turn up in the book of Genesis, and lots of these stories are essentially oral stories, and so we missed the steps. We can't really see how they've been transmitted over time and how they've evolved over time. Lots of it happens in an oral context, and otherwise it happens in texts that we've completely lost. We have only tiny fragments of all of that literature, but certainly those types of myths provide extra evidence that these stories have followed that particular route. These stories, you find particular motifs and clues, you know, like the rib. You find it in one text and you find it in another text which is remote from it, and you can't really demonstrate the transmission from one point to another, but you know it must have happened. Lots of it's just lost, and we're always dealing with that in these things. But it's a fair surmise, isn't it, that those two stories are connected, and that that supplies the extra bit that we're missing.
Serpent symbolism is very much present in the ancient world and associated with gods like Apophis, Ningishita, Thoth, Nehebkayu, Shiva, among many others, and is associated with knowledge and wisdom. Even in the Old Testament, Moses' serpentine staff swallows a pharaoh's staff. So why do you think the book of Genesis views the serpent as evil?
Yeah. There's different types of knowledge, isn't it? Here. Well, what's going on there is that there's a concealed knowledge, there's a hidden knowledge that belongs only to God, and the serpent tricks Adam and Eve. So the serpent here is a trickster. So it's a trickster motif is what you have here, I think. But there's always this idea that there's a concealed knowledge, there's a hidden knowledge, and or in the Prometheus case too, the idea that in that particular case, what's of concern there is that the Olympians, the gods, are concerned that if man gets fire, that he'll pose a challenge to the gods. The gods feel threatened by the power that man might develop from these tools, and so he has to be restrained and punished for this. It's a very similar idea in the book of Genesis, the idea that God wants to retain certain things, and the trickster wants to empower Adam and Eve, and they fall for that. And it's not implied here. It's implied here, but not explicit here, because of course it's in a monotheist environment. God can't really feel threatened because he's a supreme being. He's completely in charge. But in terms of the narrative, there's certain things that he doesn't want his creations to have and to know, and it's implied here that it would empower them in ways that he doesn't want or feels threatened by.
Over time, alchemy has appeared to have changed all the way up to today, the modern world. Do you think in the long run that it has stayed mostly the same, or do you think it has gone through a drastic transformation since the ancient days over time?
Yeah, alchemy. Yeah, certainly. Alchemy is a very, very rich tradition. It's a very, and it comes up in all sorts of ways. And we find that today. The word alchemical is just sort of tacked on the front of almost anything. But that's because it's a particular worldview. It's a particular way of looking at things. But its ultimate roots are in metallurgy, ancient metallurgy, and the processes of metallurgy, whereby you view the processes of metallurgy, which are spectacular and also dangerous and also very powerful. You view those as being metaphors for life in general, for your inner processes, for cosmic processes and so forth. You use it as a set of metaphors for understanding the world. And this takes proper. What you have in the Western tradition is, in particular, is external alchemy, laboratory alchemy, where the metallurgy, the blacksmith has now become the it's still basically the
Could you resume what you were just saying? There was an internet interruption.
I'm not sure. How do I get back to the meeting?
No, you're back in.
Am I?
Yeah, you are.
I can't see you, that's all.
Okay. It's okay. I can see you. Just keep talking.
Keep talking. Yeah. Okay. What was I saying? I've forgotten where I was at.
You were talking about the transformation of alchemy into the modern world.
Yeah, yeah. So that there's different lineages of alchemy in the Western tradition. There's at least 3 different lineages, different types of alchemy, and they change over time. Alchemy. One of the things about alchemy in practice is that it needs raw materials. It's attached to particular raw materials, and so metals and herbs and other things. So it takes different forms in different environments, and certainly it changes over time. It's a very flexible sort of tradition. It's a very broad sort of category, alchemical. Essentially what it means is this identity of energy and matter. The 2 things go together. The idea that the lowest is the highest. The way to understand the spiritual is by understanding the physical. It's essentially that idea, I think. That's what characterizes alchemy in all its different forms.
So what do you think caused the author of the book of Genesis to view Eve, it seems to be trying to blame women for problems, and the Greeks do the same thing with Pandora, and it seems like it's kind of a reverse of the problem in the Sumerian myth. Like, okay, Enki is a man, he's at fault. Nenma is a woman, she got it right. But in the Genesis story, it's just completely reverse the scenario. And then the Gnostics come in, and then they de-reverse it. They create Sophia, this wisdom goddess.
Yes.
And to kind of counter the Jewish ideology. So what do you think is going on there in all those conflicts?
Yeah. In the Gnostic case, the Sophia is particularly interesting, isn't she? Because I'm interested in that mythology in the Greek context, Hephaestus and Athena, and they move into that Gnostic language in different forms. Athena as Sophia. But what's happening here always, I think, is that they're using male and female as sort of ciphers, as they're using it in a metaphysical sense, although of course it has social consequences. If you present the female sex as being responsible for cosmic evil, then that has social consequences, of course. But mythology works like that. Mythology naturally presents things in human form. Instead of saying in the beginning there were these elements, fire, air, water, earth, and so forth, the mythological mind says in the beginning there were 3 brothers, and it presents things in human form in terms of a story. And one of the most basic stories is, male and female, man and woman, and the basic facts of reproduction. Man and woman have child. They're using that as a type of algebra, if you like, where so if you present the female element as being responsible for certain cosmic configurations, in a different tradition you could reverse that because you want to say the opposite about those cosmic configurations. So in some ways it's just a consequence of mythology, I think, that you're using male and female as metaphors for metaphysical ideas, and so gender roles and things will get swapped around, not for political reasons, but for metaphysical reasons. They're using it as a language. They're using it as a shorthand. I think that's what's happening. Yeah.
Everything that the Gnostics, Marcionites remind me of is I think they're kind of, what they're trying to do is they're bringing back the polytheism that used to exist in ancient Israel before monotheistic Judaism took over. And seems like they're talking about when they call the being they call the monad seems to be El, because in the book of Deuteronomy, as commonly understood in scholarship, El gave Yahweh Israel. Yahweh inherited Israel from a bigger God,
Yeah.
and Jesus appears to be made El's son from the Marcionite point of view.
Yeah.
And they seem to be woven in the Hephaestus Demiurge, Yahweh syncretism, interwoven with the Yahweh being El's son tradition from pre-monotheistic Israel. And I think they're trying to wove it all together to finish the articulation that Yahweh is really an inferior God, and to make him out to be confused with the Greek god of fire seems to play a role in that, because Hephaestus is a limp god. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that from the Gnostic point of view, what they want to do is, from Marcionite point of view, what they want, there's sort of an anti-Semitic agenda there as well, or that's the way it's presented to us, or it seems to us, that what he wants to do is this sort of symmetry, whereby the Old Testament God has created an evil world or an evil situation, and the New Testament God comes on the scene to remedy it, to fix it. So they're looking very closely at the Old Testament God. They're looking very closely at the Hebrew God from a Hellenic point of view. And they come up with different, they're attracted to particular texts. And of course, in Deuteronomy, you get a different characterization of monotheism than you do in other parts of the Hebrew scriptures, because it's not, in fact, monolithic. Jewish monotheism, it happens over time, and there's infiltrations and residues of polytheism and the Babylonian experience and all of that, they become very sensitive to the fact that there are different codifications and different types of monotheism in the Old Testament, and they're trying to sort it out and fit it into that Marcionite symmetry. But the upshot of it is that there must have been an evil demiurge that created the veil of tears, that must have created a world of suffering. And or the world is a prison. You can take it from, once again, in the Phaedo of Plato, which is one of his most famous dialogues. Socrates compares the world to a prison, and he says we're like prison guards. We've been set in a particular, given a particular thing, and we're not allowed to leave our post until we're given permission. The idea is that the world we're compromised in the world. We're bound into it, and we're stuck here. We're shackled. That's a very Gnostic sentiment. It comes out of Plato, and then you go hunting in the Old Testament for themes. The Old Testament's just so enormously rich that you can go hunting for it to develop particular symbols and stories in the ways that you want.
All right, then. Well, thank you for joining me, Dr. Blackhirst. This has been a wonderful discussion, and I would like to have you come back again at some point.
Sure.
If you would like to.
Yeah, sure, certainly. I'm always happy to talk about these sorts of things. Yeah.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, and if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron, and or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during a live stream. Thank you.